and Shabbat Shalom to everyone. And I believe that Andrew and Judith Casriel will be celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary next week, their golden wedding anniversary. That is amazing. And I can tell you that having just had the same great privilege, Lindy and I want to tell you that I am just beginning to get the hang of this thing called marriage, and I'm really looking forward to the next 50 years. So I hope that you are as well. Mazel tov. So our parsha, Ki Tavo, it describes an event which will still take place, hasn't happened yet, which the revelation at Mount Sinai apart is probably unsurpassed in terms of its drama and its scale. Before Moshe departs from the nation that he's, after all, led for 40 years, he commands them as follows. It shall be when the Lord your God brings you into the land that you're coming to take possession of, you shall present the blessing on Mount Gerizim and on Mount Eval. And then the parsha begins to describe in detail how the ceremony will be performed. So half the tribes will stand on top of one mountain, and the other half will stand on the top of the other mountain. And the ark and the Levites are going to stand between the two mountains, and they're going to shout out in a loud voice 12 curses and their parallel blessings. The Torah only describes the curses, but you get the opposite blessing as well. And it goes something like this. Cursed is the person who makes an idol. Cursed is the person who demeans his parent. Cursed is the person who moves his neighbor's boundary. Cursed is the person who misleads the blind. Cursed is the person who distorts the judgment of a stranger, an orphan or a widow, etc. And when they recite this blessing part, on the blessing side, they turn to face the tribes on Mount Gerizim, and they all shout out, Amen. And then they turn to face the tribes on Mount Eval, and they recite the parallel curse. And again, all the listeners on that mountain shout out, Amen. Well, the extraordinary thing about this is that these verses actually take up more space than the whole of the giving of the Torah, the whole of the story of creation, and the whole of the Exodus from Egypt. So there's clearly something going on over here. And for that reason, this entire episode, this huge drama, attracts an enormous amount of commentary and questions. And among them are the following. Why Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval? What is significant about these two mountains? Why these 12 blessings? They're so odd. They're nothing like the 10 commandments. And what's the whole purpose of this dramatic ceremony? So some of the suggestions that is made concerning the location are as follows. Apparently, these two mountains actually have been identified, and they straddle the town of Shechem, which was Abraham's first stop as he entered into the land of Canaan on his journey from his homeland. And Shechem is actually geographically located pretty much in the middle of the land, almost equidistant from the northern and the southern boundaries. And the two mountains apparently form an absolutely perfect amphitheater. So you didn't have to bring in all those guys with their big booming speakers and microphones and stuff. They could be heard perfectly as they called out to these two mountains, and the responses could be heard. And then there's this very strange phenomenon that of these two mountains, which are side by side, alongside each other, straddling one opposite the other, Mount Gerizim is covered in greenery, and therefore it's quite appropriate to be the mountain upon which the blessings were recited. And Mount Eval opposite is completely barren and desolate, which is consistent with the idea of a curse. Well, as for the purpose of this ceremony, the commentators actually understand this as being a covenantal moment, a moment for the nation who are about to enter into the land, and one which parallels the covenant which was made at Sinai for the generation who had come out of Egypt. And if you actually study the verses over here in the account, and you go back to the story at Sinai, and you read those verses, you'll discover that there are a number of parallels, and they actually look very similar. But there's a very significant difference as well. And that is that the events, although both these events occur on mountains, and lots of other things seem to happen in the Torah on mountains, but at Sinai, the people stand at the bottom of the mountain, while here at Mount Gerizim and Ebal, they stand on top of the mountain. There they were completely passive at Sinai. They stood and said nothing. And over here, they all shout out Amen after each utterance. Because Sinai is a passive experience for the generation that's left Egypt, and they're going to be living through a miraculous intervention by God for all those years in the wilderness. But this new generation now are going to have to assert their own efforts to conquer the land, to tame it, to make it theirs. They have to be assertive. And God's voice and his presence will have to be heard not from somewhere on top, from above, from outside, from the top of the mountain. Now the voice of God in Eretz Israel has to be heard from deep down from the land itself, as we work it and as we live in it and as we make it the society that God intended it to be. And by the way, some people actually understand the symbol of the Magen David to refer to these two covenants. The first part of a Magen David is a triangle pointing downwards, and that's Sinai, as God reaches down to man. And the second part of the Magen David, interlocking, is a triangle pointing upwards, and that is the second covenant, the one which has to grow from within the people themselves. But let's turn for a moment to understand the choice of these 12 commandments that were shouted out to the nation on both sides of the mountain. When you look at them, they have one common denominator. So, setting up secret idols, abusing one's elders, removing property lines, committing incest. What do they all have in common? And the answer is, they're all done in secret. These are actions that are perpetrated by someone in a position of power against a victim who has no recourse or protection. And the powerful message about this covenant, as the people are about to enter the land, is that too many societies suffer from a discrepancy from what we show on the outside and what happens behind closed doors. And this is the cancer of hypocrisy, and it thrives in a world of secrecy. And the power of this particular covenant and this collection of blessings and curses is that Israel could simply not afford this corrosive sickness to be present in the land they were now going to build as a special land in the eyes of God. And I think that there is a message over here for all of us as well. Because as we've seen in our own country, a steady stream of double standards, very often practiced by members of the elite. And it is a very corrosive force in society. And I have to say that even in our own communities, you never know what's going on behind people's closed front doors. And it's unhealthy that these things should happen in a way that is not transparent, that when there are issues in a family or in a community or in a group, that they are not brought to the surface, they're not discussed, they're not brought out into the open, and that we find ways to be able to overcome them. Instead, they're allowed to simply be perpetrated in secrecy. And that is a very, very damaging idea. So this idea of the covenant is a very important one. because it is about the standards of transparency and of openness from outside to the inside and from the inside to the outside that are essential for any healthy community. Shabbat Shalom.